Sociology. Welcome to the Sociology of Education webinar series, co-hosted by the Canadian Association of Sociology of Education and the Canadian Sociological Association. This session is titled, if we could go back the slide, is Sociology of Education, AI Perspectives and Insights. I am the moderator and the discussant, Dr. Beyhan Farhadi. I'm an assistant professor at OISE at the University of Toronto, and my own research examines disciplinary and learning surveillance through education technology, as well as the politics, material conditions, and policy landscape of edtech and online education in public schools. So I'm very excited to be here and participating with you today. Before I introduce the presenters, I want to first acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. Although we are on a virtual platform, we are connected by the physical infrastructure, the land, and the water underneath us. And we should take a moment to locate ourselves. I am speaking from Toronto near Lake Ontario in the Rouge watershed, and I am mindful that the water and shoreline that shape daily life here are part of Indigenous lands and relatives that long predate the city. Collectively, we acknowledge the territory to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in building positive relationships between nations and in developing a deep understanding of Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people. We invite you to learn more about the territory on which you reside by visiting nativeland.ca. A couple of housekeeping notes. We have Zoom generated closed captioning available for accessibility, also in French, and you can select the live transcript option as well. We ask that you save your questions until after the presenters have concluded their presentations and the discussant, which is me, have concluded the discussion. Then you can enter your questions in the Q&A function in Zoom. Please note that your name and question will be visible to all attendees, and you may upvote to the top of the list. I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenters. The first presentation is titled, What Does It Mean to be AI Literate? Skills and Perspectives Among CEGEP Teachers in Quebec. This presentation will be delivered by Dr. Lisa Giachini and Florence Bélair. Lisa Giachini is a teacher and researcher at Cégep, Edouard-Montpetit, holds a PhD in the physics of the University of Bologna and a graduate micro-program in post-secondary education, the University of Montreal. Her research activities span both the fundamental sciences and humanities. She is currently the principal investigator on a research project funded by the Ministry of Superior Education as part of the program for research support in post-secondary teaching and learning. This project aims to develop a portrait of typical perspectives on generative AI in education and to understand the existing interrelations between these perspectives and the pedagogical approaches of college faculty in Quebec. The co-presenter is Florence Bélair, recipient of the Governor General's Academic Medal in 2024. She is pursuing her college studies in natural sciences at Cégep Edouard-Montpetit. She is a recipient of the Research Initiation Scholarship for Emerging College Scholars offered by the Quebec Research Fund, Society and Culture to pursue a research internship on artificial intelligence literacy, and a recipient of the Nova Sciences Research Initiation Project scholarship from the Government of Quebec. She's also in progress of completing research internship in composite material chemistry. Our second presentation is by Nancy Hsiung. Nancy's, I want to also apologize. I think we've corrected your name uh, on the slides. Nancy is a first-year PhD student in the Educational Leadership and Policy program at OISE University of Toronto, specializing in comparative international and development education. Her research interests are at the intersection of generative AI, school leadership, mental health and well-being, and education policies. She previously earned an MA and ELP and an honors Bachelor of Science in Psychology with a minor in Education and Society, both from U of T. Beyond academia, Nancy has worked at UNESCO and the Ontario Ministry of Education. She has also volunteered as a math and English tutor with various nonprofit organizations and in Toronto. Thank you very much. So I'll pass it over to Lisa and Florence.
Sorry. Okay, we got it. So I will let can you see it clearly now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I will let Florence start the talk, and I will go on later on.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us the wonderful opportunity to present our work in this webinar. And without further ado, let's begin with the presentation. So, following the emergence of artificial intelligence, and as we've been witnessing its omnipresence in our society, most particularly in some sectors like education, several psychometric scales measuring artificial intelligence literacy level have been developed and validated. However, it is to be noticed that there is a lack of research on detailed portraits of literacy levels among different population groups. And so, to our knowledge, a portrait of AI literacy levels has not been published for professors in the Quebec College Network yet. Similarly, there is no published data on the perceived skills and expectations of teachers in terms of training. This leads us to the following research questions. So firstly, what is the level of artificial intelligence literacy of college teachers in Quebec? Secondly, does literacy level depend on the teaching discipline and socio-demographic variables such as age, gender, and education level of teachers? Thirdly, what are the needs and expectations of teachers regarding artificial intelligence? And would these expectations align with their gaps? Or possibly, are they not interested in addressing those gaps at all? So, in other words, will the picture that emerges from the psychometric scores and the one that emerges from people's own expectations align? As you can see, all of the questions above then point to a more global one, which is none other than what does it mean to be AI literate for college teachers in Quebec? And so, to continue, recently in Quebec, the professional competency framework for the teaching profession was revised to, among other things, integrate artificial intelligence since it is closely linked to digital competency. It is then really important to examine the perspectives of different populations of teachers and establish a portrait of skills and their dependence on different social demographic and professional variables. And so to help build this portrait, this present research will then provide a picture of the literacy level of CEGEP teachers, their expectations and needs regarding artificial intelligence training, and will also present an analysis on the alignment between the skills and expectations of teachers. And so to do this, we collected data using an online questionnaire containing three main sections. There's the first part that contains a general information questionnaire in order to collect the discipline and the other social demographic variables, which we then used as independent variables. Then there's the second part that consists of a reduced version of a Likert scale already published in literature, which was based on three components. Those three are technical understanding, critical appraisal, and practical applications. At last, the third part presents the following open item. Indicate what knowledge you would need to better understand and use artificial intelligence, or choose not to use it. For their part, the in-depth interviews were also used to specifically examine the relevant elements of expectations in artificial intelligence training. In total, our sample consisted of 345 teachers across 27 CEGEPs and 27 interviewed teachers in 10 CEGEPs. Following the data collection, a quantitative analysis for the psychometric scale data was conducted with JASP, and finally, a qualitative analysis for the open item in the questionnaire, and the interviews are still in progress. I will now let Mrs. Lisa continue with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Florence. So now we come to the part of the results. I will first present the quantitative results and then the qualitative results. So in these slides, we can see the average literacy scores in the overall sample. So it's, as Florence said, a Likert scale is a 5 points Likert scale. So as we can clearly notice, the literacy score is lower for the technical understanding component. Actually, the difference is about 20%, so it's quite high in size. And we notice as well, when we examine the standard deviation, that the technical understanding component is the one exhibiting the wider standard deviation. So as a whole, these results inform us about two elements. First of all, technical understanding appears to be the great weakness for college teacher, for CEGEP teachers in Quebec. And it is also the component which is more heterogeneous. Now we go to the analysis by different variables, the ones that Florence said, talked about in the first part. So we'll start with the gender variable. We took the overall sample and we divided this sample into groups, male and female. We were not able to create other groups because we didn't have enough individuals in each group to be statistically significant. So as you can see, the average score for the three components are lower for the female group. And this, as I say, this is true for the three components. When we perform the analysis with the t-test to see if this differences is statistically significant, we clearly see that the differences is statistically significant and with a high extent, especially for the technical understanding and practical application components. So, as a whole, these results inform us about the fact that the literacy scores are gender dependent. Now we come to the analysis by discipline. So this analysis was a little bit tricky because we have to do a pre-analysis first to ensure that the groups that were formed, the disciplines within the groups that we formed, were actually homogeneous in terms of average literacy scores. For example, at the beginning, we put informatics in the same group of natural science, but then when we examined the homogeneity of the different disciplines between the group, we clearly see that the average score for the informatics was much higher than for the other disciplines in the group. So we split, we come out informatics from the natural science group. In the same way, we had to separate ours so that in the beginning was with the language and literature, because it appeared that in that group, disciplines were like has a scores which was much higher compared to the other disciplines in language and literature group. So we then performed the ANOVA, and we found that the differences were statistically significant. And as you can see, actually, in orange, the two disciplines, the two groups of disciplines that exhibit a higher score as compared to the other disciplines. As I say, they are informatics and arts. So as a whole, these results inform us about the fact that the literacy scores are discipline dependent. We now come to the analysis by educational level. So in this case, we divided the overall sample in three groups, bachelor, master, and PhD. And you can see here the average score for the three components and for the three groups. As you can notice from the descriptive statistics, there are not the difference are not we cannot find actually significant differences, even if we can notice that in the PhD group the scores are a bit higher. But when we performed the ANOVA test, it doesn't appear to be statistically significant. And the reasons probably because in this group, the PhD group, there are less individuals, and the group appears to be also more heterogeneous because the standard deviation is higher, and as you can see here. So non-statistically significant differences were detected in this case. We now come to the analysis by age. In this case, we divided the entire sample into three groups. The reason that we used to divide the groups in this case was to try to have a limited number of groups, and also that these groups contain a comparable numbers of individuals and also a comparable time span. So we divided into three big groups. Less than 41 years old, between 41 and 50 years old, and more than 50 years old. So as you can see, there are not statistically significant differences between the groups for the three components. Also, the average, even without looking at the results of the ANOVA, already we can see that the average scores are really very, very close. So non-statistically significant differences were detected in this case. We now come to some preliminary qualitative findings. As Florence said before, this analysis is still in progress, but we can already come out with some indications. As Florence said, we had in the questionnaire an open item: indicate what knowledge you would need to better understand and use artificial intelligence, or choose not to use it. And so we are now analyzing the responses of teachers for that item, and put the fragments of meaning into different categories. And we come out with three main categories, which are shown here in order of ranked according to the number, to the frequencies of the meaning fragments that we could find in each category. So it appears that the fragments around pointing to a learning how artificial intelligence can be used, specifically in a pedagogical framework, is the first one. And secondly, teacher seem want to learn about how artificial intelligence actually works, and finally to better understand ethical and other possible issues. Of course, these are the three main ones. Of course, there will be other categories, but those are the three main ones. So as we can see, we can link directly this category to the components of the Likert scale we analyzed before, but the rank in this case seems to be different. So from the analysis of the psychometric scale, it appeared that the technical understanding was the lower score, and then the other two were almost the same one. Whereas here, when we ask directly to the teacher what they would like to learn, they seem to prefer first how artificial intelligence can be used, so something more related to practical application. Secondly, knowledge related to technical understanding, and on third position, knowledge about critical evaluation. We are not, at the same time performing analysis on the interviews, so we are able to nuance to a little bit the finding that we found that we have for this open item. For example, the fact that the critical evaluation, the critical appraisals is according to the open item in the third position does not necessarily reflect the fact that the teacher don't want to know about it, but it's most probably due to the fact that this area has been the one most covered by previous training. At the same time, we have noticed that teachers appear interested in learning about applications of artificial intelligence within their own discipline. And we also would like to stress as a overall observation that come out both from the open item and from the interviews, that the technical understanding is reported as a training need, but not as the extent one would expect given the required level in this area. So putting together these results, we come out with some topics for discussion. So technical understanding is the least developed and more inhomogeneous component. This suggests the need for tools of different levels in training. And also stress again that teachers seems to be interested in this component, but not as much as they should be given the results of their abilities in that area. Also, as I said, we noticed the literacy scores are gender and discipline dependent. So this confirms the necessity of multiple levels of training courses. Also, I stress here that teachers expressed the needs to learn about the pedagogical application within their own discipline. And I also would like to point to one aspect that refer to the gender dependency. Actually, a 5-point Likert scales is based on self-assessment, as it is normally done with this kind of scale. So we wonder how objective can this difference be considered? In other words, is the fact that the scores are systematically lower for the women group really reflects the fact that they know less about that, or they are like more severe when they are self-assess their abilities in that areas? So I will let Florence conclude.
So overall, these results suggest that the training program should be structured around disciplinary areas, and that the theoretical, technical, and critical components should be brought together in a way that feels more coherent and clearly connected to practice. In particular, the technical component may need to be made more approachable and appealing by presenting it within concrete discipline-based activities that help learners see its relevance more immediately. At the same time, the way that each disciplinary area is organized should take into account the fact that learners do not all start from the same level. Some differences depend on gender, and it is important to acknowledge them, but it needs to be done without reinforcing any form of gender bias.
Thank you both very much. Nancy, when you're available, you can come on camera, and then we'll all go off camera, and the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Can everyone see my slide?
Yes, we can. And also, Lisa,
Yeah.
unmuted. You're unmuted too. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So thank you for letting me present here today at this webinar. I'm presenting my master's thesis, and it's titled Rise of Generative Artificial Intelligence: Insights from Secondary School Leaders. Before I begin, I want to give an acknowledgement that my thesis was supported by funding from SSHRC. So like many earlier waves of technology, generative AI has also reignited debates over its use in schools. So I'm sure many of you here know about generative AI and like what its capabilities are, and like the most notable tool being ChatGPT. So to give more context for the Ontario area, so there is a mandatory technological course that students have to take where AI is somewhat covered in there, but there's a lack of policies on generative AI, even though this academic year they do have professional development in this area. And most of the studies in generative AI, they mostly focus on higher education and internationally. So this study sort of fills that gap by examining Ontario secondary schools. So the purpose of my master's thesis was to look at school leaders and what is their understandings and views of integrating generative AI, like what is their motivation rationale for integrating it, and it sort of provides like current knowledge on the different barriers and supports that are currently in the system right now. So there's different significance and contributions to studying this specific topic. So it's pretty novel, this study, and it adds just to the generative AI literature as well. And it can be helpful for different stakeholders for understanding what currently is happening in the field. So like what areas need support to better support educators. It can help for more longitudinal work in this specific area. And it's helpful to inform ways of enhancing students and teacher learning. And for parents and communities, it can be helpful to get a glimpse of how Ontario is preparing their students for the future. So these are my main research questions. So the first one is, how do Ontario secondary school leaders understand the integration of Gen AI in their schools, and what values inform their perspectives? And the second question is, what do Ontario secondary school leaders perceive as the key opportunities and challenges of integrating generative AI in their schools? So this was my conceptual framework. I won't go too much into it because I feel like the findings are probably the most interesting to the audience here. So I'll give a brief overview though. So I used e-leadership, pedagogical beliefs, and educational change as sort of the analytical tools to, I guess, understand what the school leaders believe. Yeah. So moving on to methodology. So I use the basic qualitative research design where I use semi-structured interviews. So recruitment occurred in the fall of 2024. So there was many different avenues. So I used online forums, mailing lists, and social media. So I reached out to different people who might have fit the criteria on LinkedIn, for example. And also I leveraged my professional network. And on the right, you get to see sort of like what my poster was at the time. So the participants, so there was 20 secondary school leaders in Ontario. So there was 14 department heads or department chairs. There was 2 other school leaders, and there was 1 system principal and 3 vice principals in Ontario. So they came from various parts of Ontario. So 4 of them came from rural parts of Ontario, 5 came from suburban parts, and 8 came from urban parts of Ontario, and 3 of them came from a combination because some of them are centrally assigned to their school board. And this sample covered 11 of the school boards out of the over 70 school boards here in Ontario. And there was representation of 2 Catholic boards and 18 public boards. So this study focused mostly on the public sector, and the participants could have been their expertise in knowing generative AI could have been like they don't know too much, or they are sort of like a subject expert. So this study sort of welcomed all different levels of expertise. So for data analysis, I use Braun and Clark's reflexive thematic analysis, where there's 6 different stages for analyzing qualitative data, and here they are. So it's really just trying to understand and really get to know your data and sort of refine and define them into themes. So on to the interesting findings. So these are the tools that I asked the school leaders, like, what tools do you know, and what tools have been approved in the Ontario secondary school sector? So at the top, there's so many tools that they're aware of. And then at the bottom, these are the approved tools. So the more approved tools, they're called Microsoft Copilot, which I'm sure a lot of people know, and so same as Google's Gemini. And then another tool is Adobe Express. So to answer the first research question, I'm going to explore the first theme. So that is like the motivation and rationale behind why they're integrating generative AI. It's due to their openness, enhancing school productivity, and preparing students for the future. So I'm not going to read everything on the slide, and there's going to be quotes from participants, but I'm going to give like more higher level summaries. And if you have questions, you can let me know. So this is the first theme. So as a lot of people see generative AI, the technocratic assumptions of generative AI is like that it can enhance one's productivity. So a lot of school leaders find that it can help them reduce their workload in one way by sort of streamlining their processes for, like, for example, writing emails, writing report cards, making sure curriculum aligns with their class. And then also it's a good way to start. Like, it's a good starting tool for brainstorming and synthesizing information. And other school leaders find that this tool is like similar to other areas of technology advancements that they've seen in their career. So they think that generative AI should be used as a good starting point. And also this tool they see it as a good way to be used because it can reduce their cognitive load and better help out with the work-life balance. Another reason is that they believe generative AI is part of the hidden curriculum, and they don't want to separate real life from school. And they think that would be a disservice to students if they do not discuss this. Other reasons for the rationales for integrating generative AI is that some school leaders, they're just more open and interested in innovation and creativity. So on to theme 2 regarding the concerns on generative AI and its hindrance to student learning and educators' responsibilities. So other school leaders viewed that they don't really want to integrate it because it's a breach of their responsibility. They find that if their school leader found that they were using it, they should be sort of disciplined for that. And as many school leaders have brought forward as their initial thought, a lot of them thought that like this tool is just another avenue for students to cheat. So another reason why they don't really want to integrate it is because of the current demands of their job. So they already have so much on their plate to complete throughout the school year, and they don't have enough time to understand like what this tool is, what it's capable of. Another reason is the idea of data privacy and corporate intrusion into the public schools here in Ontario. So like, what is this tool being used for? Like, who's mining this data, and sort of what is this tool outputting to students? So another reason for this concern of generative AI is that some school leaders want to preserve the student voice. So a lot of the output that generative AI has, it's really one particular voice that doesn't represent the students in the classroom. And they want to ensure that students are able to like have their voice and also make sure they gain the critical skills such as like reading and writing throughout their secondary school journey. So on to answering research question 2. So why do Ontario secondary school leaders, like what do they perceive as the key opportunities and challenges for integrating generative AI? So we're going to explore some of the opportunities and challenges for generative AI for equitable learning. So some school leaders voice that it can be used for personalized learning. So it's supporting students on their journey rather than like replacing it. And they find that they're able to use this tool to come up with more activities that can scaffold learning for students. And some school leaders find that generative AI is pretty good at ensuring that they can put the content or like the course work into the student's language of comfort. And other reasons are that students' writing can ensure that generative AI can improve students' writing so they can get to the grade level that they're at, so they can meet the standard. And other reasons are that it can level the playing field. So some of the school leaders, they're located in rural Ontario, and they find that generative AI is a way to get students an opportunity to have like a graduate level tutor in their house rather than paying a lot of money for a specialized tutor. So in Ontario, we have different streams in high school. So there's like the more academic and university pathway versus like the college or applied stream pathway. And some school leaders find that if you use generative AI, it's actually helpful for more of the university prep students because they're using it to enhance their learning, to deepen their knowledge, like ask questions and further their understanding of a particular area, whether they found that more college level students, they found that they were just using it just to get the job done. So they found like that was a difference. Other opportunities and challenges are how it's shifting assessments in schools. So a lot of the assessments now are moving towards, the application-based and back to pen and paper in the classroom. And also some school leaders mentioned that they're using more video assessments. So they're more focusing on the process of their understanding of the concepts rather than the final paper or the final product or a final test that demonstrates their learning. So more of the process is impacting their final grade rather than the product. And also some students find that they implement an invisible word into the assignment. So for instructors, some instructors have found that the students would just copy and paste into, like, for example, ChatGPT, and they don't really read the instructions. So they would implement an invisible word. So that has nothing to do with the course content. If they implement that, then they find that like, oh, like that student totally used generative AI because that word is not relevant at all to the assignment. Other challenges is how it's changing the work is that plagiarism tools are inaccurate. So some of the school years voice that, like, for example, ZeroGPT or Turnitin, it has like a bias towards people who are multilingual learners, and they wrongfully like flag these students for using generative AI. Across the school leaders, they mentioned that there's a progressive approach to discipline. So it depends on several factors, like, grade level, weight of assessment, and also there's no standardized plagiarism policy, but it's more progressive in terms of like, if they used it, then it's not sort of like a hard zero. Another challenge, but also opportunity is whether students want to use or cite ChatGPT. So some students brought forward, like, why can't we just cite it? It's a good source, right? It's a good question. Some school leaders may not have known, but there is ways of citing like ChatGPT, like APA 7 has different ways of citing it. Also, some school leaders voice that like, it's not as prevalent with senior students for using generative AI because they are more worried about post-secondary and they don't want like a plagiarism claim at the end of their high school journey. So there are some challenges for integrating generative AI. So it could be, it's several of the reasons it's because of the attitudes on the limitations of using generative AI. So the first one is there's a lack of professional development, so this study was conducted in the fall of 2024. So in 2025, there is professional development this year, but at the time there wasn't. And a lot of school leaders find that they're uncomfortable or they have the fear of the unknown. Like, what is this tool they find that it's unverifiable and it's untrustworthy. And the Ontario curriculum, they find that's very rigid, so they find it hard to integrate generative AI into this curriculum. And some educators who are more experienced, they already have the necessary toolkit, so they feel like they don't need to use generative AI. And it doesn't align with a professional practice, and they believe that it cannot replace the teacher. And also, there's a lot of bias, like I mentioned, like it can throw false positives on AI for people who are ESL or multilingual learners. And also, so as we may know, generative AI is a product made by technological companies, so it's not trained on underrepresented voices, and it's very Eurocentric, so it has different biases. So now we're moving on to more of like the equitable access and connectivity and costs in Ontario. So this is another challenge for thinking of integrating generative AI. So access to generative AI, it varies across the province. So sometimes it's blocked in some school boards, but others it's not. But then you can use a VPN or data to get access to it. Also, regardless of location, in Ontario, there are disparities in poverty spread across certain boards. So in some school boards, there can be immense access to like Chromebooks, for example, like there's one-to-one programs, but then in other schools, there's limited supplies. And other school leaders voice that, if you want to use it in the classroom, then it's sort of not equal because some students may not have access to internet or a device at home, which people found that this was true in the pandemic. Some students had to go to public places to use Wi-Fi. And usually, for example, for newcomers families, getting access to these sort of tools is sort of on the less, it's not a priority for some families at the expense of other priorities in their life. And I also found that in wealthier regions in Ontario, students have more abundant access while others don't have as much access. So it's a mixed bag in Ontario. And so other challenges are the capacity limitations of generative AI. So a lot of school boards have like either some framework or they don't have a framework. So sometimes it's very just broad policies or light direction from the school board. And so it's kind of a mixed bag, like how to use it. Some school leaders are like, they're going to wait till they have more concrete direction. And there's just a few workshops on its use, but it's mostly on embracing the tool rather than thinking critically about it. So there's a spectrum there, and there's other issues that are taking priority that should be more focused on, like the teacher crisis shortage. Other capacity limitations is that students themselves may not have the capacity to learn or like use this as an effective tool, because some school leaders mentioned that students already struggle with some technology. So like they found that like for the OSSLT, the literacy test they have to do, like even though they can read and write, they failed because it's administered online. And some school leaders find that students just lack maturity, so they don't feel like they should use it. Like in the younger years, because they don't really understand like the repercussions of using this tool. So now looking more in towards like the supporting factors in the system. So a lot of school leaders, even though they don't have professional development, they don't really have like those areas of learning. They go out themselves and learn, or they have like co-learning among staff who sort of they act like as a facilitator to integrate it into their classroom, and they just spread it and they go and talk about it with their colleagues to show like this is how I've used it, and give their staff like more ideas on how they can incorporate it. So, and there's more support from upper administration. Also, some school leaders have sort of implemented generative AI as as a directive in their annual learning plans, so they can sort of see like if they got it at the end of the year. And they also find that since there's no policy in place, that also means there's no restrictions in terms of its use. So there's no barriers, they can forge ahead with it in their teaching practice and sort of use it how they would like. But as mentioned, there is forthcoming professional development opportunities, and a lot of school leaders, they go out themselves to conferences and they spread the knowledge. So they said that like it's more a grassroots level sort of implementation right now. And a lot of school leaders have sort of connected people, or they have resources at their board, like such as like the board technology specialist, or they have like a learning library resource that they spread around. And also there's working groups on AI as well in their school boards. And so some school boards in Ontario, they have a framework right now, or they're coming up with a framework. So the next one is just a call for a comprehensive generative AI policy. So there's several policy recommendations that they have. So a lot of people are more, to summarize, a lot of people are more for acknowledging that generative AI exists, but also they're more for a more cautious implementation of generative AI in their system, because no one policy can fit like several school boards with different school cultures. And also they don't want generative AI to be put into a silo as well, because you have to integrate like different parts of like different uh, areas of study and different levels of education as well. So that's one perspective. On the other perspective, some school leaders mentioned that they don't want a focus on a specific area, and funding or more focus should be on other areas like different priorities and programs such as like breakfast clubs. Like there should be more priority focus elsewhere rather than on this new technology. And I asked my sample, I was wondering in their perspective as school leaders, who would you want at the table? And they mentioned several, they want a lot of people at the table, the policymaking table, so everyone's voice can be heard. So this is my master's thesis summarized in a very short presentation, but you can find it online. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'll say a few words about, in my kind of very hectic attempt to synthesize through the transcript and listening across both presentations, some of the pieces that stood out to me. And then I will ask, I have 3 questions prepared. And I also invite attendees to share any questions that they might have in the Q&A section. So I also want to preface that I am a qualitative researcher. And what stood out to me in the first presentation is that it didn't flatten AI literacy into a single score. It offered feedback that technical understanding was both the least developed and most unevenly distributed dimension, while also highlighting how literacy patterns would differed by discipline and gender. And what I found especially relevant is that the way that your qualitative data point beyond this like generic AI ethics training towards something more situated. So instructors sort of looking for pedagogically relevant applications in their own disciplinary contexts, which has real implications for how institutions design professional learning. And in the second presentation, I appreciated that the study was not just about whether leaders liked or disliked Gen AI. It was more about how leaders understood what integration meant institutionally, what motivated them pedagogically, and what were some of the barriers and supports that um, made things possible. And so not having a kind of pro or anti-Gen AI felt very important to hear, and that this sort of real tension between productivity and futurity, and even this sort of like moral purpose of schooling, and the themes around fairness, responsibility, and trust. I also appreciated these sort of series of policy recommendations that moved us beyond individual attitudes towards more system-facing, system-level conditions, tailored professional development, equity-oriented funding for access, curriculum, and assessments shift toward process over product. I also am mindful, having worked both in the secondary sector as well as now in the post-secondary sector, how curriculum and assessment shifts really depend on the context of your classroom and how many students are in it. So I was thinking both about the specificity of those two different panels of students, but across both, and sort of like the confluence between both, is that AI and Gen AI is not a single intervention, but something that is built intentionally in education through multiple layers of professional work. So we see AI really shaped by social location and discipline, And instructors' own accounts point to the need for training that is situated in practice. And in the second presentation, looking at some policy gaps as school leaders are trying to govern Gen AI in particular and the integration in schools. The questions I have, I kind of have my questions for like the first for Lisa and Florence, and then the second question is for Nancy, and then the third question is for the both of you. Although I certainly, after the kind of first question and hearing your answer, Lisa and Florence, if Nancy you want to respond to the to what they've shared, I welcome a kind of more conversational structure. So the first question for Lisa and Florence in part emerges from your suggested points for discussion. So thank you for that. It was like a nice, it made my job a little easier. Your findings show that the technical understanding is the least developed and most uneven dimension, as I mentioned, and patterns differ by gender and discipline. In particular, while age and educational level, if I'm understanding correctly, if I read it correctly, it doesn't show a kind of statistically significant difference, which is interesting because, of course, I'm thinking across these panels. And then the question is sort of like really building on your qualitative findings, because that's sort of my kind of literacy, my own literacy methodologically. What would, and I think specifically about this encouragement to avoid sort of individualizing gendered responses or moving from a deficit framing. So what would be an adequate institutional response that avoids this kind of framing? So for example, by discipline and gender, and treats AI literacy as an issue of professional infrastructure and equity rather than a kind of like individualized attitudinal, not to say that those pieces aren't important, but to kind of point at the relationship between the two with an emphasis on that kind of institutional piece.
So I think it's important to point out also the observation that we made about the fact that this scale it points out to an auto-evaluation. So first of all, I think it will be interesting to really know if this difference comes from a real difference in abilities, or it's more due to like a more severe approach towards that female may have when they evaluate their own abilities in this area. Because I think this is going to be something that is important for training, because if we stuck to the results that show that there is this difference in gender, then we may want to structure training in a way that this is a knowledge without creating bias, but that create like a different levels to be able to cover all different levels of the participants. But if this difference is not objective in a sense, is not real, so that part doesn't remain in the training because if it's not something really due to the fact that the abilities are so different, then when figure out our what is the best way to do the training, that this aspect will be less important. So I think I'll be, because the qualitative analysis is still in progress, so it's maybe interesting to see if there are other aspects, other elements that point out in that direction, or try in the future to find different ways to address this aspect. I don't know if it responds in a global way to your question, but that's the points that I wanted to stress about that. Yeah, if you want some more clarification about the.
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing you, it's sort
Yeah.
of pointing to the possibilities and limitations of valuation because of um, how self-confidence or like the kind of socialization of women within these kinds of systems really require us to situate
Exactly.
what is real and objective. That's what
Yeah,
I'm hearing.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's I think the very interesting point because we are trying to measure something quantitatively, but in the same time, as a basis, this um, the scale that we use in itself is not objective in a sense because it's based on an auto evaluation. So I think we have to be careful uh, when we try to measure really quantitatively certain aspects, not to go to not to over measure, not to over quantify something that in itself is not measurable or is not totally objective. It's not objective, it's somehow subjective.
I appreciate in that way the mixed methods. And I also would be curious, just my own, of like taking the results back to women and asking what meaning they might make of it and that sort of difference. It's sometimes thinking of kind of like the ways that interpret all kind of data moves through interpretation and the interpretive kind of aspect of meaning making is what stands out to me, I think, in your answer. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy, did you have anything you wanted to share in response? No pressure. You can say, no, I'm good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, for my master's thesis, I didn't really focus on a particular demographic data. Rather, I just mostly focused on whether they were like in more rural or urban or suburban areas for their understanding. But I don't think it really mattered in my sample anyways of the difference of knowledge. Um, but I did want to say, I guess if I would put like some demographic data to distinguish, I guess, would be, I guess they mentioned more experienced educators were more against it. But then the other perspective was that some school leaders mentioned that if they were more not as experienced or they just came into the profession, they would also be against it because um, they kind of understand the negative repercussions of generative AI and sort of like the data and privacy concerns. But yeah, that was a good question, Beyhan.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really mindful of just how in the moment we are in this transformation in some ways, or what people some people do not describe it as a transformation. Some people describe it as a kind of iteration of historical shifts, right? So even in the storytelling of AI and the ways that it engages our imagination and the imagination of participants is interesting to me.
Thank you. If I have a moment, just
Please, please.
because before I was so stressed because of this,
Yeah.
problem with Florence and coming, and I forgot at the hand to acknowledge the fundings. So I just wanted to say some words about it. That this project was done thanks to the support of the Quebec Ministry of Higher Education, which founded a broader research project of which this study is a part through the PARIA program. And we want also to acknowledge the Fonds de Recherche du Québec for supporting the BIRC Research Scholarship for Florence, because it's thanks to this board that she could like participate for the first time in a real research project, and I think she enjoyed it. If I
Thank
can speak
you.
for her, but she can speak for herself as well, of course.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you. So my second question, Nancy, brings together a aspect of your presentation and the recommendations that you listed at the end. So a tension that stood out to me was between Gen AI framed as or understood as an equity and opportunity, and so the kind of reference to scaffolding, multilingual supports, leveling the playing field, and then Gen AI is a threat to student voice and learning, and including the concern that it might erase linguistic and cultural specificities. So if we are connecting this particular tension with these recommendations at the end, I'm curious about if you had to identify one or two recommendations as leverage points in response to this tension, what would they be and why?
That is a really great question. Yeah, so those are great tension points too. That came up as well. So I'm looking at the recommendations right now, and the ones that like stood out to me are that you should not put generative AI in a silo and that one size does not fit all. So some school leaders are probably going to be like there's going to be a spectrum everywhere. So there's going to be people who are completely for it, who are against it, and who's kind of on the fence. And then there's going to be direction coming from their board, direction coming from the ministry as well. And there's going to be direction from the own administrators as well in the school. So I guess to leverage the tensions between like, inequity, but also the losing of student voice. So I think the one size fits all is a good way to look at things because, it doesn't, one generative AI policy can't make everyone happy. Um, but it can sort of strive to be something that is like a middle ground in one way. And also the other point is that you should not put generative AI into a silo because every context is different. So for example, in rural Ontario, this policy implemented could be looking very different versus a wealthier region in Ontario, for example, in an urban place. And also you have to consider other factors. So some school leaders find that some policies are siloed, so they would not like to see that. So you should focus also not just on like location, but also the disciplines, like how you have to integrate different voices into the policy as well. And I think the end of the day is that combines like both perspectives is that the benefit of the student, always centering the student voice and sort of like how is this policy going to benefit the student for their future? Yeah, hopefully that answered it.
I mean, I think we're all thinking about it, and maybe there isn't an answer entirely, but some considerations that we might have. Lisa and Florence, have either of you really been thinking? I mean, my third question, just a kind of spoiler, is about the ways that you both are situated in your own work and thinking about AI, because like there's a way that it's studied out there, and then there's a way that we kind of are moving with it on our own, in our own way, encountering it. But specifically with respect to these kinds of tensions, as it's student focused, and I know that Lisa, you talked about like the presentation is about the kind of like instructor and their where they're at with respect to AI literacy. But of course, the work of instructors is student facing in whether it's in a supervisory role or in a kind of teaching role. And I'm curious about if you had any thoughts about, yeah, this kind of tension between student voice and equity.
The tension about students' voice and
Yeah, so like this idea that having this argument, these two arguments that are on one hand speaking to the ways that in particular generative AI, of course AI is like built into all kinds of spaces in all kinds of ways, but generative AI and its use by students can offer ways to scaffold learning. And so there's a way that students can use it in productive ways, in ways that allow them to better access learning and better meet learning objectives. And then there is the concern that the ways that Gen AI is engaged with can um, really threaten student learning and student voice and their ability to um, locate themselves in like culturally and socially specific ways that get flattened. And I am curious about how like you might conceive of responses that instructors might have to that tension.
Yeah, I think we have to address this tension. We have for sure to go towards a paradigm shift in teaching and learning. Florence can add something later about the student point of view, but from my side, from the teacher side, I think really that at the point we are, we really have to to shift towards a new paradigm in the sense that we have to restructure our also, of course, more than the teaching part, even more the evaluating part, because this is the part that is most caring. You know, the first thing when generative AI arrived into the educational world was everybody, oh my God, every student is going to do all the, you know, the exams with the generative AI if the exams are not under a controlled environment, etc., etc. So we have a kind of two like two groups, you know, in one side, yeah, we have to control more the environment so that they are not using artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence. And on the other side, because I'm seeing that from the interviews, not related to the literacy aspect, but other aspect that I'm investigated, that there are like this kind of two groups, the one that are thinking we are going more on, you know, controlling the environment in evaluation so that we are sure that they are not using it. But on the other side, there is also the group that is saying, okay, but this let me think about the fact that, you know, it's more important, as we know in education, we should know that it's more important the process, not, you know, the the number at the end, for example, in a physics exam. So, you know, some professors are really in trying to understand how this event, the coming of generative artificial intelligence, actually can let us better evaluate the process of learning rather than just the procedural, you know, aspect that come out to final results. Like going more towards authentic evaluation, for example, something like that. I don't know if Florence want to add something from the student point of view. Of course you can. If you don't feel to, it's all right too. It's up to you.
On the student side, it is something that we're already noticing that a lot of our evaluations are really more processed, focused how we're going to do the work, and sometimes the teacher um doesn't even really evaluate the results. It's really just the process, or also a lot of our evaluations have become oral evaluations to be sure that we're the ones um doing it. So it's something that we notice a lot. Yes, and also again in the student groups there's also people that are separated into the ones that don't think there's anything wrong with using AI. It can be used to generate ideas, like it was mentioned in the second presentation. And there's also the second group that doesn't want to touch it at all because they are scared that they're going to be, even if they just use it to generate ideas, they're scared they're going to be flagged for plagiarism and immediately get a 0, even though they didn't use it for the whole project, just for the beginning to get the ideas. So I think it's very important on the student side to get clear I don't know how to say, clear informations about how teachers feel about AI and how they will implement it in their class, because it's something that's still a little blurry for us. We don't know the limit, because sometimes teachers don't even want us to have the phones in the class, and others encourage us to use AI to generate ideas. So it's still a bit confusing for students on that side, I think. That's what I would say. So we're a bit torn apart in every way.
Thank you. There's two things that stood out to me. One is, Lisa, your point, the distinction between process and procedure, and the ways that often one's engagement with evaluation can turn to procedural process, procedural kind of framing around process, and then also recognition, Florence, about this like moment where there aren't norms. And there really requires explicit negotiation and conversation about what constitutes good enough use, good use, knowing that those are not like moral categories. Is there any last words? We are actually at time. I think I mean, I didn't see any questions from the audience, and I feel like we got a sense of the ways that you both are really, or you all are thinking about AI in your own work, as in this last question around teaching and student use as well. But yeah, an opportunity for any last comments before we say goodbye. All right. Thank you very much for the attendees, for being with us, to the panelists for a really lovely pair of presentations that made my work as a discussant quite lovely. And thank you, Sherry, for wonderfully hosting this gathering. Wishing you all a good remainder of the week.